Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
We've got a very busy pod to get through today, Phil, because we've got loads of headlines and we've got two virtual guests.
We have. So grab yourself a coffee, depending on what the weather's like near you this morning. It could be a little bit miserable, but grab yourself a coffee and sit tight. Or if you're driving somewhere, then stay tuned because. It's a busy show. We'll get on to those interviews as well in a second. But yeah, it's heading very much into that autumnal winter period now, aren't we, Curtis?
Yeah, very much so. And talking of guests, so our first guest this morning will be John Maielli, who a lot of listeners will be familiar with from his time at CarWow, because he was sales director of CarWow, and he was actually employee number one. He was the first person that CarWow employed after they launched. Now, he's heading up Car Care in the UK, which is a Swedish-based automated inventory specialist, with its sights very much on growing in the UK. And they launched in 2019. John joined them last year, and we spoke to him for one of our standalone suppliers special episodes. So we'll be catching up with him. There'll be an extract from that coming up soon.
Yeah, and like Curtis said, have a listen to the full interview because he'll give you a little bit of background, one, in terms of John's career, because you'll recognise John particularly from the CarWow time within his career, and he shares obviously a little bit about what car care is and some of the customers that he's already got signed up in the UK that are using it and how they're using it and the benefit they're getting from the product. So that's in your podcast feed from earlier on this week, so do have a listen to that when you get a minute if you haven't done already.
And we're also joined this week by Stephen Whitten for his regular Menable Moment. And this week, it's very much focused on the importance of opening up and talking about mental welfare. And, Steve's very much on a mission to nudge mental wealth further up the car retailing agenda. So do stay tuned for that at the midway point.
Yeah, and he's doing quite a bit of work on that at the minute, and if you do ever catch up with Steve, and he'll share some of the conversations having with some of the dealer groups and how that is starting to accelerate and evolve now as well.
And next week, Phil's on holiday, so we'll be welcoming back industry guru Carl Davis as co-host whilst you're doing a bit of a road trip, aren't you, Phil?
I like you missed the word again out. That was nice. Very, very
again.
Yes.
He's on holiday again.
So I'm doing the north. So yeah, the weather doesn't look so good here, but I think next week it might get a little bit worse as I head up towards the Scottish Highlands and then across down into Northumberland for 6 nights, 6 B&Bs. But wish me luck. But be looking forward to a bit of a break and some visiting. But we'll update you on that when I get back.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
Headlines this week come from Car Dealer AM, the Financial Times, Motor Trade News, and Automotive News Europe. Starting with Vertu delivers strong first half interims for its 2025 financial year and announces it will be axing its Bristol Street Motors and Macklin Motors branding by next April. EV discounts are now double those of ICE cars, finds new research from JATO. The Gloucestershire-based Completely Motoring Group seeks buyer to rescue it from administration. And it's the Paris Motor Show this week. Guess what? We're not there, but we have a couple of big stories coming out of the show, and we'll look at them in the second half of today's pod. But just to give you a flavour, European car makers plan dozens of cheaper models to survive EV winter, and BMW boss calls on EU to cancel 2035 ICE ban to reduce reliance on China.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
So before we discuss this week's headlines, here's an extract from our latest supplier special episode with Philip and I in conversation with John Miele, UK country manager of Car Care, the Swedish startup launched here last year with an all-new app-based inventory management tool. Can you take us through what the Car Care proposition is and what exactly is an automated vehicle inventory specialist? Because I know how you describe yourselves on the website.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the proposition is pretty simple. It's to try and make dealerships more profitable by consolidating their systems and providing automation. It essentially helps them manage their stock better. And what we'll do is, as soon as a car hits the balance sheet, we monitor everything that happens all the way through to when it gets delivered. So there's kind of no line for time on a balance sheet, but obviously a lot of our partners will look at the cost of a car for them on a daily basis. So whether that's through interest on stocking loans, whether it's through depreciation, cost of space, etc. So they'll have an idea of how much a car costs them. And so what we want to try and do is help them speed up how quickly it comes from when, as soon as they acquire it, to getting it through, from appraisals to getting it prepped, to getting it sold, to getting it delivered, even once it's sold, and do that as quickly as possible. So the way you can help that is by monitoring every step of that. Of that process, and providing that information back to the management team, so they can easily see where all cars are at any point once it's on their balance sheet.
And does that inventory management cover new and used?
Yes. So it's any car. They work in very different ways. So when we entered the UK market, we've focused on the used side at the moment, but we will be doing new very, very shortly in the UK as well. But yes, it's any vehicle within their stock.
Yeah, and if you were to describe what Car Care's USP is, what would you single out?
Yeah, there's probably a few. I mean, it's that kind of consolidated single source of truth for across sales and after sales of every vehicle. It's not just MI, it's also an operational system as well. So it's not just saying, oh, here's what's going on, but actually there's things in place to help you actually make an impact and improve processes if things are broken. And we're pretty much experts at extracting data from any system. So we haven't found a system yet that we can't work with. So we work with all of the kind of major UK systems from, in terms of DMSs, CRMs, workshop systems, valet systems, etc. And we can pull all that information so that everything is updated and in one place. And then I think another thing that's quite nice is we have a benchmarking tool as well. So you can see how you're performing, because you might think you're doing well within, compared to what you were doing 12 months ago within your group. But there's a ranking system that compares you not just within your group, but also you get a global ranking as well. And it really helps to create good operators. And, like the top 5% of our partners are in a diamond tier, as an example. And we've already got a couple of UK dealers in that tier, which is great as well. And yeah, that helps them just make the improvements, learn from what the best are doing. And then I think another thing that's become apparent is, from a statistics point of view, there's kind of a couple of things. One is what's happening with cars that we have on our balance sheet today and what's happening with the cars in stock. But there's also what's happened with cars that we've sold, that, what have we done? How are we trending over time? And literally you can just drill down into different things that are click the button, so you can compare how long cars take to arrive, prep and sell from different sources? How does it compare when it's a grade 1 vehicle versus a grade 2 vehicle from the same source or from different sources? And you can look at the prep costs and the profitability of those cars as well. So with the clicking of a button, you can really get an understanding of what, where you source cars from and what it does to your business.
And how are you operating with groups across agency and franchise? Because by default, some of your clients will be operating both systems. So how does that
Correct.
factor in?
Yes, you're absolutely right. There's different setups. For us, it doesn't actually really matter what they have, because we'll pull from any system. It kind of doesn't matter either way. What is interesting, some of the clients we have in Sweden, obviously specifically in Mercedes-Benz, have been operating under agency for a while, and it can just fit in quite nicely. And what I think the benefit is, if you're a group with multiple, different franchises, it doesn't really matter which. Some franchises might operate under agency, some might not. Some might actually operate part agency on some lines within a franchise, and some not agency. Again, it just doesn't matter. I think one of the things that feedback from the big groups in Sweden, we've got, over 50% of franchise dealers in Sweden work with us now, and the big groups like Dinbil, Hedin, Belia, etc. We integrate dozens of systems for those guys and put it all together. What they found is it's quite nice that if they acquire a new dealership, we can literally hook up those new systems at that new dealership within 24 hours, and operationally they can start running as they normally would. It's the same as across any other dealership. If they pick somebody up from one dealer and put them into the new dealership, we've got car care running within a day or so, and they could just run it as they would do any other dealer. So yes, it doesn't really matter to us what the kind of setup is in terms of systems or a sales model. From an OEM point of view, I think they're quite interested in how we bring together all the different systems, especially when they're looking to try and help. If they are going down an agency model, they want to try and help, obviously, consolidate systems and provide better systems for their networks. So we're speaking to a few over that as well.
I mean, that's a very in-depth description of what car care do, and obviously their acceleration since entering the UK, and obviously since John joining the car care business in the UK, hasn't it, Curtis?
Yeah, very much so. And it was a fascinating conversation. And a couple of things struck me. He made a point right at the beginning there, which will resonate with a lot of listeners. There's no line for time on a balance sheet. Because further on in our conversation, he was talking about those lost cars that do happen from time to time within dealer groups. So, the stock's coming in and you can't actually find, a number or, individual cars or whatever. And his system really does address that, so nothing gets lost in the future.
Yeah, and if I may say, there was a long extract there from the interview with John, but I mean, there's obviously, in terms of the full interview, a lot more detail in that interview with John around, the processes, what they're doing, how they're doing it, but more importantly, what they're thinking of for the future, what they're thinking of bringing to the market for the future. And I mean, you'll hear in the conversation with John, but I asked him where he was when I was in the industry many years ago, because this is the kind of thing that would have made my life and a lot of managers' lives across the sector a lot easier around that efficiency thing. And as you say, that time lost on a balance sheet, it's that downtime, that efficiency side of things. So great interview there with John, and the details are on the interview there of how you can get hold of John if you do want to discuss car care in a little bit more detail. But talking about efficiencies and the dealer sector, we'll head over to the headlines now, with the first one going over to Car Dealer. And basically the interim results, the half-year performance results, have been announced by Vertu with Robert Forrest, a friend of the podcast. And the Car Dealer headline is that Vertu to axe Bristol Street Motors and Macklin Motors names as it delivers strong half-year results, saying that the historic Bristol Street Motors and Macklin Motors names to disappear from the dealerships, Vertu to be the brand of choice for Vertu Motors from now on. The bosses are announcing and saying that the rebrand comes as strong H1 results are published, and resilient performance sees gains in sales of new retail EVs. So quite a bit of news there in the one sort of announcement from Robert and the team.
Yeah, so let's start with those financials because, I mean, we've been waiting for these, as indeed the industry has, because for the last few weeks, we've been looking at the year ends for the last financial year. And this is our opportunity to have a look at what's happening this year, certainly from Vertu. And it follows hot on the heels of Motorpoint's half-year results, which we spoke about on the podcast only last week. So let's look at those H1s, which cover the 6-month period up to September. And looking at adjusted profit before tax, that was down by £8 million on the same period last year. But as Car Dealers says, still came to a very robust £23.5 million. Now, that drop was actually expected. The dealer group said as it battled higher inflation costs and invested in more staff. And Vertu added that it expects profitability in the second half of this year to improve over prior levels. So that's really key to this story. And that's very much due to what it sees as a stronger used car market and boosted used vehicle trade prices. So looking at revenues, they were actually up by 3% to £2.5 billion for the period as the business focused on after-sales used cars and retail new electric vehicle sales, all of which were success stories during this first half.
Yeah, and there was a great summary from Robert on LinkedIn on the back of this morning's announcement. He obviously goes into some of those financials. There is a link to the video where he does the webcast that shares both the presentations and talks through the full interim results for the business. But he does cite in the post there about obviously the continued development of their portfolio within the addition of new Chinese manufacturers, which includes both BYD and Leap Motors, which is the joint venture with Stellantis there, with the Chinese EV manufacturer, and saying that the key plate change in the month of September saw like-for-like new retail sales volumes up by 5.1%, with the retail market being down 1.8%. And continuing strong out, so they've obviously saying that they've outperformed that general retail marketplace, and saying the like-for-like EV sales volumes are more than double in September, almost broadly static in the UK. So all in all, it's quite a good half-year results for Vertu and quite a lot in there.
Yeah, very, very positive. And it is worth heading over to Car Dealer to check out the full story because it is very detailed. It does cover a lot of ground. But the second half of this story is really about the rebranding, which was part of this announcement to the stock exchange. So the branding exercise, according to Chairman Andy Goss, will boost marketing return on investment and cut costs. But it does mean dropping Bristol Street Motors as a brand name and Macklin Motors. And both names are very much sort of synonymous with Vertu because they've been the sort of the names over the doors, if you like, for most of its sites. Bristol Street Motors in England and Macklin Motors in Scotland. There have been some Vertu sites that are standalone branded as Vertu, But what will happen from certainly April next year is they'll all be Vertu branded. And Andy Goss says, following a detailed review of our brand strategy, we are confident this transition will be well received by customers and manufacturers and yield immediate marketing efficiencies, as well as other operational benefits, which will help to mitigate continued cost pressure in other areas. So it is. It looks as though it's sort of consolidating under one branding, which does make an awful lot of sense. But I suspect, this would have been debated heavily around the boardroom at Vertu, because Bristol Street Motors, as a brand name, it's actually celebrated its 100th anniversary this year. And I did a bit of research on this, Phil, which I know you'll be interested in, because it was incorporated in 1924, the branding Bristol Street Motors. And it was for a single site Ford dealership, which was in, guess where? Bristol Street in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the name dates back to. And it is very much part of the group. Was featured heavily in certainly marketing campaigns. Vertu invested heavily in sports marketing, sponsoring events, sponsoring teams, very much with Bristol Street Motors at the fore. And I seem to recall when Robert was on the podcast, he was talking about that brand awareness, that high level of brand awareness. But as a group, they're clearly confident that they can move on from those two brand names and, as I say, consolidate under the Vertu banner, which certainly within the industry is a very, very strong name indeed.
Yeah, it does make sense. And, to Andy Goss's point, that branding, they should see immediate impact from that. It should work very well. I mean, I'd say that he has to do fewer ties now and scarves for both, Bristol and Macklin, but those have been discontinued now as the previous announcement from.
That's why they phased out the ties.
So they don't have to. Yes,
yes,
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes. But heading over to motor trade news, and as Curtis said, JATO have published a report saying that EV discounts now double those of ICE cars, saying that savings rose at a dramatic rate in last year, and that discounts available to the UK motorists buying new electric vehicles are now almost double those offered to buyers of petrol and diesel cars. And this is according to the automotive analyst JATO, and saying that transactional data compiled by JATO show that EV discounts have increased dramatically over the past 12 months by 53% to an average of £5,006, whereas the average discounts across all new diesel or petrol-powered vehicles have risen by only 13% to 2,652. I wonder if the UK government's ZEV mandate has got anything to do with this one, Curtis.
Do you think so? I mean, talk about big discounts, 53% as an average. That is massive. It's a fascinating story, this one. And JATO has, within the story, it's looking at different brands, and it has found significant differences in the way manufacturers approach discounting EVs, so looking at EVs in particular. And it cites MG as an example, where discounts have increased by 106%, demonstrating what JATO calls an aggressive pricing strategy to capture market share, which, I'd go along with that. Yep. And it also looks at BMW, who it says appears to be taking a more restrained approach, increasing discounts by just 14%, suggesting that the premium car manufacturer is trying to preserve its exclusivity, or is simply less affected by competition from lower cost cars which are available on the market. So, I mean, this is something we've touched on many times on the podcast, and that level of discounting is of particular interest at the moment in the final quarter as we close in, as you say, on the ZEV mandate, and how manufacturers close the year and what sort of fines they will have to start paying if they haven't sold as part of their quota.
Yeah, and there's some, just finally, there's a couple of nice statements in the article from Matt Crow, who's the Senior Product Manager at JATO, who described the UK electric vehicle marketplace as a complex and multi-layered environment in 2024. And he finishes to say that the main takeaway from their latest data is straightforward. Car makers are offering more generous discounts on EVs than they were at this time last year, and they are allowing buyers of electric vehicles to negotiate more money off than those sticking with ICE powertrains. So kind of sum it up there, the state of that marketplace as we see it at the minute.
Heading over to AM Online for the next story, and the headline there is Completely Motoring Dealer Group seeks buyer to rescue it from administration. So this is looking at the Gloucestershire-based Completely Motoring Group, probably better known to listeners for the Suzuki franchise, which it represents in Staverton, and it is confirmed that it has entered administration alongside its multi-franchise motorcycle chain. So it was announced on social media last week, and the joint administrators are now urging anyone interested in purchasing what is a £70 million turnover business to get in touch. And that business actually covers Thunder Road Motorcycles Limited in Bridgend and John Wilkins Engineering Business. So this, I mean, it's an unfortunate story. It's an unfortunate development, but because they've gone into administration, hopefully parts of those business can be rescued.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'll potentially follow up on this at some point when that becomes available. And as Curtis said there, they've got brands across from Aprilia, CCM, Ducati, Honda, Indian motorcycle. I love one of them. Have you seen them?
Yeah, they're great.
Kawasaki, Triumph, Suzuki, Vespa, and others. So, as Curtis said there, very much a motorcycle-dominated business as well as their Suzuki representation. So you would assume that some of them would be attractive propositions for other businesses, either as a startup or to add to their current portfolio of operations. So again, it's a real shame that it's come to that, because you don't like to see any business, and our thoughts go out to all the employees of that business if they are caught up in the middle of that one.
We'll be back with the rest of the week's headlines after this week's Menable Moment.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Menable Moment, looking at mental wealth and well-being awareness and best practice in the automotive sector. With me, Stephen Whittam.
Yeah, hi everyone, it's Menable Moments time again. Hope you're well. I thought I'd refrain from saying how quickly this year's whizzing past, because it's the middle of October already, but I guess by even mentioning that, I've just done it, haven't I? So I'll promise not to make too many more references to it. We all know how quickly this year is flying past, and yeah, scary, but anyway, there we are. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to many people actually who reach out to me after listening to the podcast to say thank you, and to just say how much some of the stuff that we talk about on Menable Moments really resonates and has meaning for them. There's a bit of a trend in social media terms to say that if something lands in your feed, or you're hearing it or seeing it, then it's meant for you at that moment. And I guess that's for those of us that are sort of kind of in touch with that spiritual side of things, thinking, yeah, actually, that's the universe or whatever's way of saying you need to hear this message right now. So I just want to say a big thank you to those people who do that. And it's really uplifting, actually, and really rewarding to know that, firstly, that these messages are landing and there are people out there who, need to hear what we're saying. But actually, more importantly than that, what it emphasises is that we do really still have a massive need across our industry to talk more openly about mental health and mental wealth and everyone's well-being. I see some great stuff going on around raising money for Ben in particular and other charities, and all of that is just amazing. And I hope that all the stuff that I see in terms of posts on social media really do encourage everyone to talk more and get environments created around you where it's okay to talk. Now, just very quickly to remind you that we last year actually changed the language to stop talking about mental health, because we were finding that people were going, oh God, not again talking about that subject, because it resonates in dark messages, dark language, words and phrases that we don't want to talk about. And let's be honest, we're a diagnostic and fix-it business, and we're still very masculine and very male dominated, and put all of that together and we have an environment where we don't typically want to talk about stuff we can't fix, and we don't want to talk about stuff that's dark or depressing, a bit like this weather with the year rolling on. So that's why we changed the language to mental wealth. And even in the last couple of weeks, I've had some real high-profile CEOs who've picked up this phrase and gone, wow, that's brilliant. Why have we not thought about that before? Because just the word wealth actually suggests it's striving towards better times. It's striving towards improvement and betterment. And in order to do that, it's about care, it's about nurturing, it's about looking out for each other. And in our industry, we genuinely need to create environments where it's okay to do that. So by virtue of the fact that I'm having people reaching out to me and saying, your message resonates, here's what's going on for me, and, I need to have somewhere I can open up and talk about this stuff, just still says that we've got a lot to do. We've got a lot to do. And I'll go back to some of our founding thoughts when we first started Menable, and that is, no one is immune from mental health crises. We all have mental health all of the time, just as we all have physical health. And it only takes one change of life circumstances, or in some cases, for some people, something fairly small that others would take in their stride. And it could tip some people over into having some kind of crisis or emergency moment. So it's incumbent on all of us to create the right environment to get people talking. I've got some great examples of that happening, and it is a leadership thing, and it's about role modelling the behaviours, and having leaders lead with courage and courageously having those conversations and building well-being into one-to-one conversations. Those reviews that you do with your staff every so often, maybe once a week, once a month, whatever it is, put well-being at the top of the agenda on that. Because ironically, and this may take some time to get your head around, but if you want them to sell more cars, sell more hours and make you more money, they need to feel good about themselves. And I'm the first person to accept that 90% of what people are carrying is not the employer's responsibility and is probably happening outside of the workplace. But as an employer, as a leader, as a manager, you have a responsibility to create a place where it's okay for people to open up. And honestly, transforming the way that their business operates, the way people engage and interact, and the results are coming as well. So should you want any help with that, you know how to get hold of me, stephen.witten@menable.org. And thanks again to Motors and to you, Phil and Curtis, for giving us this platform to do this. So those messages saying your message really resonates is why we do it, guys. So thanks very much. Have a great one. See you soon.
Well, some interesting, poignant points there made by Stephen, and I think, encouragingly, the feedback and the activity, with what Stephen's mentioned there through the Menable, and he's referenced there to Ben and other charities that do a lot of work for the sector in the broader sense of the automotive sector around that, as you put it, that mental wealth. And it's great that he's getting that feedback. He's getting that, it's resonating to the listeners and those that he's engaging with across the sector. So it's good that after a lot of work and effort that he's put into this, that actually he's getting the feedback and things are starting to change and it's making an impact.
Yeah, and it is great to hear that he's getting some good positive feedback on Menable Moments, which has been part of the show now for the last 2 or 3 years. And it is something that we do value on the podcast. So many thanks to Steve for his contribution this week. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, you should, because I can guarantee that his videos will put a smile on your face on any given day. He is prolific. Always something interesting to say, always visiting interesting places and interacting with dealers. So do follow him on LinkedIn. If you want to get in touch with him, the Menable website is at menable.org, or you can email him at stephen.witten@menable.org, and it's Stephen with a PH.
So heading over to Paris now, aren't we, Curtis? We're off over there.
Yeah.
So we're heading over to Automotive News Europe and the Financial Times. There's a few stories that have kind of landed this week around some of the feedback and the conversations over there at the Paris Motor Show. And the first one is around saying that the European car makers plan dozens of cheaper models to survive the EV winter, saying that European car makers are planning dozens of affordable electric vehicles next year as they brace for an EV winter driven by the tough new EU carbon emission targets and the fierce competition coming out from China. And this is ahead of this week's Paris Motor Show, that's saying that the big European manufacturers, which have also been squeezed by falling demand, are focused on recovering lost market share with new vehicles. So it's heating up out there.
It is indeed, yeah. The Paris Motor Show, for anyone who hasn't been there, it is held every other year, and it rotates or alternates with the Frankfurt Motor Show. Paris is probably one of the best international motor shows. I had the pleasure of going many, many times over the years when I was at Motor Trade. It's a reasonable size show. It's not humongous like Frankfurt. You can get around, and as you would expect, it's a huge focus for the French car industry. So the reports that are coming out this year is very much around EVs, as you would expect, but also how Europe responds to the influx of EVs, lower cost EVs coming in from China. And within this particular report, it says that executives, some of the OEM executives say meeting the emissions targets has been made harder by a recent slowdown in the growth of EV sales, something that we talk about on a regular basis now on the pod. And consumers have become more cost conscious, and subsidies have been cut in some of the big markets such as Germany. And this has prompted one of the analysts, Henning Cosman from Barclays, to do a bit of research on this. And he estimates that global car makers will launch more than 100 EV models this year in Europe and around 70 in 2025. Now, a lot of those will be previewed either as production models or as concepts at the Paris Motor Show. But he goes on to say that cheaper prices required to make cells could cause an EV winter. So this is where it starts to get interesting, where the European manufacturers start focusing on some of the cheaper, more affordable EVs just to get a bit of momentum back into the EV market. And he goes on to say, if you're a consumer, you almost feel like buying an electric vehicle today is a mistake because you know that you can get a better one with longer range and newer tech, and most likely at a lower price pretty soon. That's really the downward spiral. And that really is the crux of it. It's getting those more affordable models out there, because I think a lot of the concentration, certainly this year, amongst the European brands is getting more of its top end models out there and benefiting from those bigger margins. But to compete with the Chinese brands, the focus really needs to start to shift on some of those more affordable models.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's good for the sector. It's good for the consumer that there is this competition now starting to appear, particularly from the legacy, more brand recognised OEMs for the consumer. I mean, just to give a little bit of an idea of how quickly this, what they're up against in China, I'm led to believe that there were 28 new cars launched to market in the last 10 days in September in China. That's how quickly the Chinese manufacturer introduced new models to the market. I think BYD are talking about 4 new models, 1 a quarter in 2025 in the UK. So, it is about, they're moving, it is moving very, very quickly, that market at the minute. So sticking with automotive news and the FT and more from that Paris Motor Show, and there's 2 stories that have kind of come out simultaneously with each other this week, didn't they, Curtis? One was in automotive news saying that EU must cancel ICE ban to reduce reliance on China, and that's from the CEO of BMW. But at the same time, there was a Financial Times press release that came out and said the EU sticks to 2035 deadline for ban on the sale of new petrol-driven cars. So we'll talk through the automotive news one first, and then we'll give a bit of context around the FT story.
Yeah, so you're right. This is comments from BMW CEO Oliver Zeeps, who says the EU's plan to ban the sale of ICE cars from 2035 will lead to what he describes as a massive shrinking of the European industry, the European automotive industry. He says the plan is no longer realistic because of the lower than expected EV sales, which we covered in the previous story, and indeed subsidies for electric vehicles. And he's saying that the discounting that we're certainly seeing in the UK, we're seeing across other European markets, is unsustainable. And he's really highlighting this push amongst the manufacturers to nudge that 2035 ban back. And he says a correction of the 100% BEV target for 2035 as part of a comprehensive CO2 reduction package would also afford European OEMs less reliance on China for batteries. So also highlighting the issue addressed and certainly faced by most of the European manufacturers. Where do you source your batteries from if you haven't got your own gigaplants?
Yeah, it's all getting, just on that bit there are reports this week that, interestingly enough, Northvolt is actually looking to be acquired by a Chinese business as well. So
you couldn't make this up, could you?
You couldn't. But as I say there, we're talking there, and the story in the Financial Times has come from internal documents that have been leaked, saying that Brussels is sticking to its controversial plans for curbs on combustion engines in the EU from 2035. So there's at the minute this is sort of saying that internal reports that have been cited and leaked from these documents saying that the EU are sticking with that 2035 deadline. They've got no plans to push it further out, and obviously saying that yes, they have been under some very heavy pressure from the car manufacturers to water down the incoming rules, but they are sticking to what they've announced on the marketplace.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we're still awaiting clarification on what the UK stance is on the ICE ban, because there has not been any official announcements yet, has there?
No, I believe it's under consultation, because I know it was muted in their manifesto. But yeah, I think currently it's believed that it is under consultation. So yeah, it's going to be everybody's waiting now. I mean, it seems like 2025 is going to be a busy year for announcements on things like this. And whilst we're talking and we're over in Paris there, just something that seems to have sort of cited my attention this week and many others is something that missed the taxation in France, which is called the malus tax, MALUS, which has been introduced in France as of January of this year, that now tax vehicles on their weight based on a certain model and criteria, but they charge, the penalty starts at €10 per kilo, and over that sort of initial threshold of 1,600 kilos or £3,500. And then once that vehicle gets to, I think it's then the excess above that, when it gets to 2,100 kilos or £4,630, that increases to €30 per excess kilo. So to give you a quick example on that, an XC90 plug-in hybrid, which weighs around 2,300 kilos, depending on its specific model, and they will charge you the €30 per kilo above the 1,600 weight. So your tax on that vehicle alone would equate to €21,000. So this is being taught. Yes,
€21,000
tax on
which
top of
is
the price of the vehicle.
I mean, that's around £17,000, isn't it?
Yeah. So because it's on weight, obviously the plug-in hybrids, because it's got the engine and the battery technology, adds quite a bit of weight. There are other things involved with some of this, that they obviously around the CO2 emission taxes and subsidies around exemption vehicles and things like that. But it's really France instigating a very interesting, hefty taxation over there in Europe, in France. So yeah, I think some of the manufacturers are basically writing off France as a potential marketplace for their product. But yeah, I thought I'd leave you on that one. But yeah, if you want to look into more details on it, it is quite complex in terms of what it applies to, what it doesn't apply to, and how it works in scale. But it's called the malus taxation, MALUS, which is being talked about a lot in Europe, particularly by the residual value and remarketing sector, as you can imagine why on that kind of level of taxation.
Malice by name, malice by nature, I think, on that one. And I'm rather hoping that Transport Secretary Louise Haigh does not listen to the podcast, because that could put all sorts of ideas into her head over future treatment of cars in the UK.
It certainly could. So that, as I said right at the start, jam-packed headlines this week. Great interview snippets there with John Miel from Car Care, and a very insightful, thought-provoking chat there with Stephen Whitton from Menable. So I hope you managed to stay tuned for all of that. And as always, the links to all the headlines will be on the newsletter on Monday morning, along with the link to the interview there with John from Car Care. So if you haven't listened to it already, you can use the link on your LinkedIn newsfeed on Monday morning to listen to the full interview there with John.
Well, Phil, you better go and pack your bags ahead of your holiday next week. Wish you a good time, and I'll be I'll be following you on social media to see how you're progressing across Scotland.
I think it will be a thick, warm, waterproof coat and wellies.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.